Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of my hot takes discussion, and today we'll be focusing mostly on role selection, namely the option to do so, alongside one-tricking, and a few other, subjects pertaining to that. Depending on when you see this, about a month ago I made a community post asking for episode 3 of hot takes, and if you haven't seen episodes 1 and 2, I recommend you do so. This is essentially one of the few opportunities where I can kind of just talk ad lib and not have to worry about scripting, or, thinking about a specific topic in mind. So you could treat this as a podcast if you want. Nothing particularly interesting happens on screen really, it's mostly just a game of me playing. It is an opportunity for you to see me play the game. I don't really get to show my own gameplay all that much, but bear in mind I'm kind of washed. I haven't been playing all that much as of recently because I've been busy with a lot of work and balancing 3 channels and stuff. I'm actually considering maybe starting a 4th. So I haven't really had the time nor motivation to play. But if you want to watch, you can. If you don't, feel free to just minimize and treat this as a podcast. We're going to go through maybe about 5, 6, or 7 comments. I'm going to screenshot them and put them on the video for you to see who posted it. Thank you again to everyone who left a comment in the community post. I appreciate it. Even if I didn't get to your comment, I'll try to maybe in the future if we do episode 4, 5, 6, and such. With that said, first take will be League should embrace multiple role mastery instead of one-tricking a specific lane or champion. When it comes to one-tricking, I personally don't agree with it, depending on how far you take it. Of course, everyone is entitled to a main. My 2 favorite champions are Pantheon and Renekton, and for some of you, your favorite champion might be Anivia, your favorite champion might be Draven, your favorite champion might be Talon, but the idea of playing that champion and only that champion is a bit, I don't want to say bad because you're free to do whatever you want and you're free to climb however you want. And there's also the fact that even though you technically can pick up a champion and get them going within a dozen games or so, it does take hundreds if not thousands of games to fully grasp and comprehensively master a champion, which means inevitably you do have to one-trick to some extent. However, this becomes a problem when said champion ends up inflating your rank to a point where without that champion you practically suck everywhere else. And with the presence of autofill or just the probability of you getting off-rolled or that champion being banned, that can adversely affect your team, since if you're a Rammus one-trick and that one-trick gets banned, or let's say you're off-rolled into mid lane or ADC, you can't play Rammus in those roles, your skill level will be much worse comparatively than where you're expected to be in whatever elo you're in. Conversely, there is such a thing as people playing a lot of different champions, which means they never fully understand or kind of get to a high level on that champion, thus they don't climb as far as if they were just playing one champion. People always recommend to pick a handful of champions, just 1, 2, 3, or 4, and just stick to mostly that, because if you're focused on learning the game, you can't do that while you're also focused on learning your champion and the matchups or the builds of their combos and rotations. Extending that to the 5 roles, that right there, yes, is indicative of a player's true talent level. Like if, let's say, one person hits Challenger or Grandmaster on top lane, but then they end up being Diamond or Master in jungle or mid, then yes, of course, they're mostly top lane. It is a weird dynamic because on one hand, you do want to encourage specialty. You do want to encourage people to stick to what they're good at, right? There's always the whole saying of stick to your lane. In the case of League, literally, because if you are too distracted focusing on every single role or trying to do a bit of everything, you become a jack of all trades, master of none, which is worse than if you were to just pick something, get really good at it, and advance yourself a lot further. Ultimately, it's about moderation. You can be partial to certain champions, you can have a small champion pool of only maybe 3 or 4 champs, but there is also merit behind being flexible, especially when you get off-rolled or if you get autofilled, you are expected to at least somewhat competently play support, ADC, mid, jungle, and top in the event you get forced into them. This actually segues nicely into the second comment someone made, where people got spoiled by the role queue system. Before, you were expected to be somewhat decent at each role because it was a given that you won't always get your main one. If you can't do at least okay on a simple champion for an off role, that sounds like a you problem, not autofill problem. To an extent, that is true. Ever since you were given the option to choose what 2 roles you wanted to pick, from I believe season 6, players have gotten pretty comfortable with only having to deal with the expectations of 2 roles, and anytime they're autofilled, it comes at the cost of their team because they play immeasurably worse. Back in season 5 and before, it was actually kind of a free-for-all. As soon as you entered champ select, everyone had to spam what role they wanted to play, and it was first come first serve. So if someone said top first, then they got top, and you kind of had to respect that because if you were first pick, and then you took top even after someone called it, that would be considered unsportsmanlike or that'd be considered griefing. Ultimately though, it was based on who was first pick, and being first pick in most cases was actually a good thing back then, since you had first pick at what role you wanted to play, whereas being last pick meant you picked whichever role was left after the 4 players chose theirs. Granted, people were still partial to what role they wanted to play back in the day, compared to now where you get to select what role you want, and with the exception of autofill you get to play it might make a player's true skill level a bit misleading, because if they're a jungle main and they're in Master Elo, they might have only the skill of an Emerald player for top, mid, ADC, and support, or even lower. So if they get off-rolled or if they get autofilled, that puts your team at a heavy disadvantage, especially if the enemy jungler is on their main role. This is something that people have been complaining about ever since the system came out. You always have those games where people are like, oh my goodness, you have a first-time Kha'Zix autofill jungle while the enemy team is a Zac one-trick with a 70% win rate. That happens very often, and Riot has expressed a desire to try to make it as fair as possible with the whole autofill parity system, which I think is a lot of bullshit, because even now there are games where one team has 3 autofills and the other team has no autofills. So I can see where the whole sentiment of people should be expected to play every role competently to some extent comes from, since despite being able to have a preference for what role you want to play, there's always the inevitability that you will have to play the roles that you don't have a preference for. And if you're woefully underprepared, you might as well chalk that game up to a loss. Once in a while you might have that game where you're autofill support and you pop off, but again, that's once in a while, that's not every game, you can't consistently do that. But that kind of circles back to the original dilemma of it's statistically better to specialize in something. If you specialize in something, you can really go the distance on that and really understand and grasp and absorb the finer details of that role of that champion, and therefore go a lot further than if you were to divide all your attention across multiple champions or multiple roles. Now, when it comes to roles specifically, I feel like it's even more difficult to force players to play all 5 roles, given they're so different from one another. Even the solo lanes, top and mid, they're a lot more different than they initially appear to be. Then you have jungle and support, which requires an entire new skill set to understand even at a base level, and then AD carry, which has a high mechanical skill floor. Realistically, it's not tenable to expect players to play quote-unquote decent at each role, since if they're expected to play all 5 roles, that might make a diamond or a master player only about as good as an emerald player. A counter-argument to that might be, oh, they deserve to be emerald or platinum if that's the best they can do on an average level, but League is ultimately a team game. Everyone has their own niche, everyone has their own role and the position that they're expected to fulfill, and by working together you can achieve a greater result than the sum of your individual skill levels. Conceptually, the idea of everyone should be a jack of all trades doesn't resonate with the overall message of League, and I think that's probably why they're going in the direction of giving players the liberty to choose the 2 roles they want to play. That being said, the whole existence of autofill is still a problem, and in the past I've always mentioned that I would much rather wait 10 to 15 minutes for a game with all 10 players being in the roles that they specialize in, than to wait 3 minutes and get 2 autofills on my team and we lose because the skill disparity is just insurmountable. It's not really something that can be solved overnight. You have to think about all the logistical components, you have to think about the demographics, the population of top jungle, mid, ADC, and support, which players are active at what time, what day, what week, what year, what season, that kind of stuff. And then you have to think of the ramifications behind increasing queue times. If you want to take away autofill to then make queue times like 10-20 minutes, that might be great for people like me who are willing to wait that long, but for someone who just wants to get a quick game in, they might be fine with the risk of having an autofill on their team just because they want to get into a game, not so much whether they win or lose. I guess it kind of deviated away from the original point of Panless's comment where they're saying people should be expected to play at a baseline level for every role, and I do agree with that in the sense that people who say, oh, I'm autofilled, I don't play this role, that's not really an excuse, given the fact that every game you have a jungler, every game you have a support, every game you have an ADC, you should be able to understand at the very least the basic fundamentals of that role because you play alongside those players every single time. It's not too much to ask to play Soraka support and then heal your team, silence the enemy, and then get a couple Qs in. You're obviously not going to be as good as someone who's played hundreds of games in that role, but everyone should be able to at least understand how to gank as a jungler, basic things like that. Because yes, you will be eventually thrown into a situation where you are forced to play support, jungle, or mid even though you're a top and ADC main, for example. But overall, it's an interesting challenge because you have to find a healthy middle ground, and for most people, the middle ground differs from person to person. Okay, I spent a lot of time on those 2 comments, so we're going to go and move on to a couple other ones and then we'll call it a day. The next comment is going to be about low elo player opinions. Just because a player is low elo doesn't mean their opinions are invalid. It doesn't take a pilot to know the helicopter shouldn't be smashed against a mountain. I get not balancing champions around low elo, although it's where it would make most of a difference in terms of player base, but opinions on other aspects like design or fun are instantly discarded with a shut up low elo scrub, which helps absolutely nobody. You're right in that telling the low elo scrub shut up because their low elo is not productive in any way, but I don't necessarily agree with the example you provided where it doesn't take a pilot to know the helicopter shouldn't be smashed against a mountain. That has nothing to do with qualifications or level of education or training. That's just common sense. Usually when low elo players voice their opinions, they're trying to do so not on the basis of common sense, but on the basis of a champion-specific thing or an item-specific thing or some kind of system or gameplay-related thing. I'm not saying, for example, diamond players are always more knowledgeable than gold players, but usually in scenarios when someone is told to shut up because of their elo, it's due to specifically pertaining to expertise. For example, a Challenger Echo player versus a Bronze Echo player, of course the Challenger Echo player's opinion will matter a lot more than the Bronze Echo player's opinion, because the Challenger player has actually applied their knowledge and because likely they've put in a lot more time, a lot more effort, and have garnered a lot more success. It would be the same as, for example, going to a doctor versus talking to some random person on the street about medicine. Yes, there's always the exception that the doctor is full of shit and the person on the street knows a lot more. However, statistically, the doctors put in a lot more time, a lot more hours, a lot more training and education on that specific topic. Therefore, yes, they are more qualified to do so, whereas some random dude on the street might not be the most trustworthy individual. I'm not the type of person to be, I guess, degreeist. I don't think a person with a college education or a person with a master's or PhD is inherently superior over someone who is uneducated in terms of intellect, because that's not about how smart you are, that's just about whether you're educated or not. So yes, when it comes to your example of it doesn't take a pilot to know the helicopter shouldn't be smashed against a mountain, of course, a person doesn't have to be a pilot to know that. But when it comes to low elo opinions in League, it's more about expertise. And of course, Challenger players who invest a lot more time, a lot more hours, and a lot more attention, and have actually walked the walk instead of talking the talk, they will have more informed opinions about whatever it is they're talking about. If we're talking about balancing dragon, or if we're talking about, let's say, nerfing this champion or nerfing this item, Challenger players have seen those scenarios to the fullest extent possible, whereas in Bronze, anything works. There are a lot of variables that happen in low elo that can kind of skew a person's perception of whether something is good, whether something is bad, or well designed or poorly designed. Whereas in Challenger, that's a lot less likely to happen, hence why people like to follow those players a lot more, if that makes sense. I think we have time for maybe 2 more comments. So this next one's going to be about autopiloting. As a GM player, telling someone to simply don't autopilot as advice to climb is like telling a depressed person to simply cheer up. Also, being nice and typing /mute all doesn't automatically make you a better player. I'm not sure if by better player you mean typing mute all makes you a more morally upstanding player, or if it makes you a more skillful player. Regarding the first line, where telling someone to simply not autopilot as advice to climb, I agree that the advice in a vacuum is not very helpful for anyone. More specifically, I think the better way to describe don't autopilot is to play every game with intent. When they say don't autopilot, they mean don't just play for the sake of playing. You should play with a specific goal in mind, with something that you want to improve on. For example, if you find that you're getting ganked a lot, you should go into every game minimizing the amount of deaths you have in the early game, while at the same time trying to still exert meaningful pressure and priority during the laning phase. So that's something you should think about as you go into every game. I guess what I'm trying to say is that technically speaking, don't autopilot is correct advice, but just those 2 words alone does not do anything to help a player improve. You have to contextualize it. You have to reword it in a way that makes it a bit more understandable and gives the person you're talking to a sense of direction in what they have to improve on. So you can give them a list of things that they should work to improve on, and that's something they should look into as they go into every game. Regarding the typing mute all doesn't automatically make you a better player, I'm going to assume you're referring to skill. Now, typing mute all is definitely a disadvantage for the player, because there are things that pings cannot communicate, and you might have a teammate trying to let you know about something or trying to kind of strategize or make calls, and you're not able to see them because you typed mute all. At the same time, the possibility of you tilting and therefore playing worse is a very relevant thing to think about, and so people are trying to choose the lesser of the 2 evils by saying, okay, even if it means I miss out on a specific call, or maybe there's something my teammate's trying to communicate to me and I can't see it, that is still better than if someone were to flame me or someone were to say FF15 and that kills my morale or makes me tilted or frustrated and I play poorly as a result of that. For a lot of people, tilting or getting frustrated is more detrimental than not being able to talk to your team. Okay, I think we have maybe 1 more. I think just because we're going kind of long, I rambled on quite a bit, but hope you guys enjoyed the video nonetheless. Final comment will be there should be more macro-focused summoner spells and not just teleport. In fact, they should overhaul that entire system. I find it boring that the game is balanced around 99% of players taking flash. The easiest way I can respond to that is the reason people don't have more macro-focused summoner spells is because 1, macro-oriented abilities are much more difficult to understand and to learn, and 2, because of how broken macro spells are when they're not completely gutted. Like take a look at Teleport. Teleport used to be broken. It used to only have a channel time of 3 seconds, you could cancel it, and you could teleport to anything at any time. Then they had to institute a lot of nerfs to it just to make it so people don't abuse it, since macro spells are broken when you can actually use the full value of it. I agree with you in that the summoner spell system is pretty outdated, and I do believe they can improve on it in some capacity. However, what we're trying to avoid is a scenario where it's the item or the summoner spell that makes the champion, not the other way around. We want the champion to be the main focus, and by making macro-focused summoner spells, that takes attention away from the champion and more on the spell, which is not something we want to do. So again, this is one of those things where it's not as simple as just adding a new summoner spell or doing stuff like that, because there's a bunch of other domino effect things that can happen from even so much as adding another mobility spell. 99% of players take Flash because Flash is a universally valuable thing to have that doesn't take attention away from the champion. Flash is powerful, but it's not so impactful that it becomes the focus rather than the champion, if that makes sense. Okay, we're gonna end things off here. This video went on a lot longer than I was expecting, but I hope you guys enjoyed nonetheless. Once again, if you have any interesting hot takes you want to include, feel free to share them in the comments down below. If you enjoyed the video and want to see more like this, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Vars, join my Discord server, and again check out my hot takes episodes 1 and 2 if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.